Shofar. Bez Hashem, we're saying the Akdoma, Hilchos Shofar v'Sukkah v'Lulav. Now, the Rambam puts them together. They have three mitzvahs, asay, positive ones, and these are the specifics. V'shmoya kol Shofar b'echad b'Tishrei, to listen to the Shofar on the first day of Tishrei. Leishav v'Sukkah kol Shivas Yimei HaChag, sit in the Sukkah all 7 days of the festival. Lita Lulav b'Migdash kol Shivas Yimei HaChag, to take a lulav in the Beis HaMikdash 7 days of the festival. And the clarification of these specifics of the commandments will be found in the following chapters. Very Halacha Aleph of Shofar. The Rambam begins. Mitzvah asay shel Torah l'shmoya truas. There is a mitzvah asay in the Torah to listen to the trua, to the call of the Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, Shenem, as it says, and this is Bamidbar 29:1. B'chodesh Hashvi, the 7th month, B'echad HaChodesh, the first day of the month, Mikra Kodesh Yelochem, it shall be a holy day for you. You shall not do any physical work. Yom Trua Yelochem, it shall be a day of blowing. And so it's written, Sefer HaMitzvahs, as part of Commandment 170. God commanded us to listen to Kol Shofar on the first day of Tishrei. And this is what it says, Yom Trua Yelochem, a day of blowing it shall be for you. The Rambam's the opinion. And the mitzvah is to listen to Shofar, that's the mitzvah, but not to blow it. And the Torah writes, in Chaim 5:85, that the reason that you make a bracha to listen to Shofar and not to blow Shofar, because the mitzvah is dependent upon hearing it and not blowing it. The proof is, from what we learn, we'll be learning, if somebody blows into a pit. Within the Mishnah is, in Rosh Hashanah 27b, that if he hears the sound of the shofar, he has performed the mitzvah. However, if he hears the echo of the pit itself, he does not fulfill his obligation. The Gemara adds that if the blower does not fulfill his obligation if he does not hear shofar, even the one who blows it. So we see that blowing is not the essential aspect of the mitzvah. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you make a bracha to blow shofar is because doing so is the completion of the commandment. But the Rav Yoram writes in the name of the Yerushalmi, we make a bracha l'shmoya b'koil shofar. Listen to the sound of shofar, and the obligation to listen is the mitzvah. However, the Kohen Nesano writes, we don't find this Yerushalmi at all. And furthermore, the Ramban, the Baal HaMaor, Rosh Hashanah 10b, in the Rif pages, disagree whether the blessing of shofar is only enacted by the times of the Kohenim, and that points that before them there was no such Yerushalmi. The Zerua brings sides to Yerushalmi, and it could be that some of the Yerushalmi is missing. As we know, Kochim is missing from the Yerushalmi. Also, the Hilchos Yesodei writes that the Nusach is the Shmoa Koil Shofar, without the base, to listen to the sound of Shofar. And listening is the mitzvah, like Rabbeinu Yerucham. The Aguda, in the Bach, writes that you should not say to listen to the Koil Shofar with a base, b, because that means to listen to that which the Shofar is commanding. In the Chuvas Rambam, he cites a proof that the mitzvah is to listen, that the mitzvah would be to blow, just like sitting in a sukkah and taking a lulav, and therefore somebody who listened and did not blow would not fulfill his obligation. And somebody who blew and didn't hear it, meaning he closed his ears, would fulfill his obligation. That's not the Halacha. Thus, from the facts, we've proved that the mitzvah is to listen, not to blow. So the Kabbalist tomorrow questions, it will say that the main aspect of the commandment is to listen, not to blow. Why then is somebody who's a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor Why can't they fulfill the obligations of others? Because people are hearing the blowing. Others hear the blowing, even if the deaf mute cannot hear it, but the others hear it. Therefore, the Rabbi Samura says that there are two aspects to the mitzvah of shofar. One is the tekiah, the blowing, and the second is the listening. But since the main obligation is the mitzvah of listening, therefore we make the bracha on the main aspect, which is to listen, to hear the sound of the shofar. Even according to the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to listen only, the blowing is a portion of that mitzvah, because otherwise there's nothing to listen to. Thus, we have a difficulty why the one who blows into a pit and didn't hear the shofar, why shouldn't he fulfill the part of the blowing, which is a portion of aspect of the mitzvah, and will hear it, the other half, from somebody who's ineligible, such as a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, he will have fulfilled the other aspect. So he answers that you can't divide a mitzvah into two separate times. It has to be at the same time. From another aspect is there's a question on how could you fulfill an obligation with that of what you hear from your friend. These are the mitzvahs that a person has to do himself. You can't do through an agent. Just like you can't have an agent be established to listen for you for the shofar. And if there is an aspect of obligation to blow, how does the blower fulfill your obligation? And he answers, since it says Yom True Yelachem, it means that all Yisrael, I can fulfill their obligation with one blowing, and therefore you fulfill his obligation by having one person blow, just as we find in Sukkah 47b that all citizens of Yisrael should sit in sukkahs, that all of Klal Yisrael could sit in one sukkah. Furthermore, the Kappish Gemorim questions what's the different sukkah that's built through a chereshet of a cotton, that it's kosher, because the mitzvah is to be within the sukkah, and why is it different than blowing of a shofar by a minor? Also, the shofar, the mitzvah is to listen, according to the Rambam. And he clarifies that the mitzvah of sukkah is only to dwell therein, and there's no mitzvah at all of how to build it. Therefore, somebody who's not has no obligation can make a sukkah. But by shofar, the tekiah and the blowing and the hearing are done together in fulfilling the obligation. You can't separate them, as we said before. Therefore, it's despicable that a deaf mute or an imbecile or a minor should fulfill the obligation of the many. The obligation of the many. The Yoel Mizrachi says, what's the difference, Yovel, that the mitzvah is to blow shofar, to be on Rosh Hashanah, that the mitzvah is to hear the voice of the shofar. We see the opposite, the hear of the shofar Rosh Hashanah is learned from the shofar from Yovel. So why don't we say we should blow it? The Maram al-Shach writes that the Rambam himself explains this answer in Sefer HaMitzvahs, Positive Commandment 137, that Yovel is different, but that there it's an announcement to make public the freedom of the avodim. As the Torah says, "Ukrosim droy ba'oret," you shall call out freedom in the land. Rosh Hashanah, the idea is to bring forth our memory before Hashem, and therefore we have to hear. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hear as well. Whereas announcing is regarding the avodah. The aim questions that the opposite, since the blowing of the Yovel is an announcement that the avodah should go out to freedom, the purpose is that it should be heard. Therefore, it should be lishmoa. Therefore, his opinion is It's like the Kabbal Samorim, that even B'Yovel, there's a mitzvah to hear. If you blew on Yovel into a barrel or into a cistern, without hearing the actual voice of the shofar, he will not fulfill his obligation, because you have to hear. And there's no difference between Yovel to Rosh Hashanah. Why the bracha is different, he doesn't mention. Halacha Mishnah explains that by blowing on Yovel, you can fulfill the obligation by hearing somebody else's. What Rambam writes that everybody individual should blow, it means that the Tkiya, the Yovel, is not a mitzvah which is given to Bezdin alone, like the counting of the years of the Shemitah, the Kiddush HaYovel. The Bezdin HaGodol is the one that makes the announcement that it's holy that year. It's a mitzvah that every individual, that he can be fulfilled with the obligation of his friends. The proof is that the Gemara on Rosh Hashanah 38a it makes equal the blowing of Yovel to the blowing of Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't say that Yovel needs, everyone has to blow. Rosh Hashanah, one can fulfill the obligation of others. It would seem that in Yovel, one could also fulfill the obligation of others. The reason that the Shofar of Yovel is to blow, like Mishnah writes, because the mitzvah is given over to Bezdin first to make sure that they blow with the Shofar. Therefore, the main idea is the blowing of the Shofar. But in Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is not given over to Bezdin. Therefore, the main mitzvah is to hear that it is being blown, and not necessarily to make the blowing of the Shofar. But by Yovel, where it starts from Bezdin, has to make the Yovel known. That's why it has to be, the main emphasis is the blowing. Where do you take the Shofar from? What animal? The Shofar, the Rambam says, you're taken by Rosh Hashanah, which you want to blow on Rosh Hashanah, or bein b'Yovel, or on Yovel, is Keren HaKfosim HaKofov, is the horn of the ram which is bent. And all the and all the shofars are not kosher except for the horn of the ram, as long as it's bent, like the male horns of the sheep. The Rae disagrees and says, Omar Avram, Hifriz al Midoisov, this would seem to go beyond what's necessarily a mitzvah b'kfufim. The mitzvah is when it's bent. But even if he blew it if it was straight, he would also be yotze the din of Tkiyas Shofar. The basis of the Rambam and the Rae is from a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah 26a. All of the shofars are kosher except for Paro, because it is a horn. It's not called a shofar. All the shofars are called a horn, as it says in Yeshua 6 verse 5. While the sound is being blown of the Yovel, so you see that it's called a Keren. In the Mishnah, in the next Mishnah, 26b, Rabbi Yehuda says, on Rosh Hashanah you blow in a horn of a male animal, and a Yovel, that of a female animal, which is the straight one. And now Levi explains in the Gemara that mitzvah Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim are both, they should be bent. Why? Here, the Rambam codifies the Halacha, according to everyone, to be more stringent, that even it has to be from a male sheep, and also bent. What's a yal? Rashi explains that it's called a steinbock. But the Oruch explains that yal is a female sheep, and it's a simple horn, straight. But the males, they're called elim, are larger and are bent. The Tosfos point out, like Rashi, from Tilim, the holim, which are as high as the Ya'alim, would seem that it's a type of animal that lives on the mountains and not a regular domesticated sheep. And so Unkel says, "V'akoi v'dishoin v'yale v'ramo." It translates "akoi and dishoin" in Deuteronomy 14, verse 4, as one of them being a yal. That they're types of wild animals, which are the wild sheep. According to some of the Rishonim, the obligation is that the shofar should not be from a cow, and if you use it from a cow, it's invalid. But the obligation of Yehuda not to take a straight one from a female sheep, or that of a Levi, that if it's bent, is only a mitzvah, an additional aspect. If it is nothing else, any shofar is kosher except from a cow. Even though Ravu questioned why do you blow with an aisle, he means to say, what is the purpose of this extra part of the mitzvah? The Rosh gives two proofs to this fact. One, Rabbi Levi says it's a mitzvah to be bent. It doesn't say it's obligatory. Second, the Pasuk says we shall have a shofar pass. It doesn't mention that it has to be bent, straight or bent. And so the Ravid says the Rambam went too far in obligating. The Maggid Mishnah questions the Ravid. Why, if that's the case, does it say yal? According to his opinion, all the shofars are kosher. Because the Mishnah explains that the intent of the Ravid is to add that the cairn of the horn of a female animal, even though it's straight and not bent, it's kosher. Today's question on the opinion of the Rishonim, that the reason of shofar bent on Rosh Hashanah is to show that as much as a person bends his nature and his thoughts to serve Hashem, it is a better prayer. But b'yovel, the reason is this doesn't apply to yovel. Why should you say that bent on yovel is a mitzvah? And if it says it has to be bent, it should have to be something that's obligatory. Or one in yovel, I learned one from the other. There should be no reason to say to have a bent shofar on yovel when there's no reason to bend one's will to that of the Hashem. The Rosh doesn't say any question by this, because even though on yovel you don't have the reason of as much as a person bends his will, still the Torah wants to make equal the blowing of Rosh Hashanah and yovel. But Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is not of that opinion. Therefore, he said that in yovel you blow that of a female ram, which is straight. The Ran questions on the Rambam three questions. According to his statement that the disagreement in the Mishnayos between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda is a continuation of the disagreement with the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi, where the shofar of a porah is kosher, is the Tana should have put the two Mishnayos together, not each one separately. Secondly, Rabbi explains that males is only sheep. According to the reasoning of bent, even other types of bent horns, even from a female, should be kosher. Third, why didn't the Gemara mention the reasoning of Abavu in Rosh Hashanah 16a that you blow in the shofar of a ram to make known the Akedah of Yitzchak, that Yitzchak was brought out on the altar, and in his place a ram was brought. Therefore, the Ran explains, like the other Rishonim, that the disagreement of Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda is only to begin with, but after the fact, any shofar is kosher. So we have in the shofar 3 levels. After the fact, every shofar is kosher, except that from a cow. 2, to begin with, it should be bent. 3, the best one would be that of a ram, to remind us of Akedas Yitzchak. The Taz questions in Orach Chaim 586. Since the Rambam writes that the shofar that you blow is both on Rosh Hashanah and Yovel is that which is of the rams, which is bent, why does he add that all the shofar's horns are puzzle, except for that of a sheep, and he doesn't mention bent? He should have said all the other shofars are puzzle. Therefore, the Taz explains that to begin with, he tells you that it should be of a sheep and bent, and then he adds that the other horns are actually not kosher. But according to the Rambam, the shofar of a keves, which is simple, straight, it would still be kosher after the fact. We have nothing else. Furthermore, the Taz writes, keves includes all the different types of sheep, like goats and rams. And the proof is from the pasuk in Devarim 14:4 and 5, that an ashur, an ox, seh, a sheep, fosim of the seh, a animal of the sheep, the se'izim, or that of the goats. Ayol, tzvi, yachmar. These are all types of deer. Yachmar is yal. Yachmar is the wild ram. And just like the pasuk tells us, the ram, after it mentions the animal of the sheep, he mentions also yachmar, that it is among the goats, and its name proves it, because we call it Steinbock. Now, bock is in the German language is a ram. Stein is a stone, and that means that it climbs among the stones, just like the male rams are called bock. So too, these are called Steinbocks because they grow among the stones which are found in the mountains. And it means a goat that is found on mountains. As the Mishnah, for the explanation, the name of it was Chaim, and the Kolboy are of the opinion that everything is included in the language of a sheep that the Rambam mentions. Because the Mishnah writes that the Rambam doesn't seem to be saying so. Taz says that this is the intent of the Rambam, that a keves includes all those animals that are mentioned that can be classified under one family of animals, which are the sheep family. Even though in the Torah it doesn't say the blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it only says Yom Kippur, a day of blowing, doesn't mention shofar. Since we find in Yovel, in Vayikra 25 verse 9, without the shofar Torah, you shall pass the sound of the shofar as a blowing. It says Tahaviru b'shofar, you shall pass through a shofar, and since the Torah tells us that the blowing on Yovel has to be with the shofar, we learn from Yovel. Now, Rosh Hashanah, the Tkiya of the Trua should be with the shofar.